WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.
This is WFYI News Now. It's January 25th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, this year's count of people experiencing homelessness in the city, the state's first ever digital equity plan. The Civic Health Index is out and shows Indiana lagging behind the rest of the country. And Indiana scored failing grades in nearly every category of the report on tobacco prevention. Advocates say raising the tax on cigarettes is crucial.
It will help a lot of young people decide that, smoking just isn't something that they want to do once the price hits a certain threshold.
Those stories coming up. But first, state lawmakers voted Wednesday to pass a bill that blocks Indianapolis from the creation of an economic enhancement district. Jill Sheridan reports on the future of the funding tool.
The bill repeals the ability of Indianapolis to set up a district where property owners pay a fee to invest in public safety, beautification, and homelessness initiatives in the downtown core. The City-County Council passed the measure late last year after 2023 legislation allowed the move. Democratic Representative Cherish Pryor says the repeal feels wrong.
Almost a bait and switch. We give you this tool, but now we don't like that you've acted upon that tool.
The measure had wide support from businesses and property owners in the Mile Square. Some apartment building owners spoke in support of the repeal at a hearing last week. The bill passed along party lines and now heads to the full House. I'm Jill Sheridan.
The Housing and Urban Development Deputy Secretary visited Indianapolis for the city's annual point-in-time count. As Ben Thorpe reports, the count is a snapshot of the number of people experiencing homelessness throughout the city.
Last year, Indianapolis recorded an 8% drop in the number of people without a home during one night in January. Those numbers are in stark contrast to the 12% increase in homelessness nationwide. Housing and Urban Development Deputy Secretary Adrienne Todman says her visit to the city was to understand what Indianapolis is doing differently.
I'm so proud of the work that's been done here by the mayor and the continuum of care in reducing homelessness, and I'm going to take back what I learned here back to D.C.
Mayor Joe Hogsett attributed last year's drop to the many community partners, including the Coalition for Homelessness Intervention and Prevention and Horizon House. Data from last year's count was released last fall. I'm Ben Thorpe.
The Purdue Center for Regional Development and the Indiana Broadband Office have released the state's first ever digital equity plan. The 5-year plan will serve as a roadmap to help increase Hoosier access to high-speed internet. A 30-day public comment period is now open. According to the report, 24.7% of Indiana households do not have home internet access or rely solely on mobile internet. Purdue VP for Engagement, Roberto Gallardo, says the team was most surprised by the data on who has home-paid internet access.
We found that a lower share of whites subscribed to paid home internet over the past 12 months compared to minorities. We were not expecting that finding.
Another noteworthy finding. The top reason for not paying for home internet over the last year was the cost of desktops and laptops, followed closely by the cost of the service itself. Gallardo says this plan parallels the Broadband Equity Access and Development Program, the $42 billion U.S. Department of Commerce infrastructure plan, bringing internet to rural areas.
Digital equity looks at specific groups, which are called covered populations, to ensure that they have access to broadband devices and skills to make sure they can participate in the online economy.
The plan includes over 80 objectives to complete the plan's main goals, such as providing residents with connectivity and devices that are affordable, accessible, reliable, and equitable. After the public comment period ends, the federal government will publish guidelines on funds that can be used to implement the plan. And while Indiana's voter registration and participation numbers have improved in the last couple of statewide election cycles, the state continues to fall further behind the rest of the country. Brandon Smith reports on the latest edition of the Indiana Civic Health Index, an effort of the Indiana Bar Foundation and Indiana Civics Coalition.
The percentage of Hoosiers who were registered and voted improved between the last two presidential election years, 2016 to 2020, and voter registrations went up between the last two midterms, 2018 to 2022. But compared to other states, Indiana got worse. Its voter turnout in 2020 was 46th in the country, and in 2022, Indiana was dead last. Why does Indiana struggle so much? The Civic Health Index indicates it's down to two areas: competitive elections and policy choices. Many races in Indiana either feature no competition or have lopsided outcomes, and Indiana Republican lawmakers have refused to consider any of the policy proposals suggested by the index, including same-day voter registration and unrestricted absentee voting. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
And for our final story today, the American Lung Association released its 2024 State of Tobacco Control report this week. It rates the effectiveness of tobacco prevention efforts across the country. Elizabeth Gabriel reports Indiana scored failing grades in nearly every category.
The American Lung Association report analyzes how well states are doing to prevent youth from using tobacco and help adults to quit. Researchers looked at things like funding for the state's tobacco prevention efforts and the amount a state taxes cigarettes. Indiana's cigarette tax, which is just under $1, hasn't been increased since 2007. Tiffany Nichols is the director of advocacy for the American Lung Association in Indiana. She says raising the tax is crucial.
It will help a lot of young people decide that, smoking just isn't something that they want to do once the price hits a certain threshold.
This year, Nichols says she's focused on educating lawmakers so they're prepared for the budget session next year. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Elizabeth Gabriel.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Darian Benson, Drew Dodlin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Abriana Heron. Our news director is Sarah Neal Estes. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.